The scent of expensive lilies always made me nauseous. My mother insisted on keeping them in the foyer of her penthouse, claiming they masked the city's smog, but to me, they just smelled like a beautifully staged funeral. I stood on the threshold, my suitcase resting against my shin, listening to the muffled sound of classical music drifting from the living room. It was 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. I wasn't supposed to be back from Amsterdam for another 4 days, but the conference had ended early, and more than anything, I had wanted to surprise Ethan. Ethan wasn't at our apartment. When I called his phone, it rang through to voicemail. An unusual occurrence for a man who answered my calls on the first ring, even during board meetings. An uneasy instinct had guided my Uber straight to my parents' building instead of our home. They lived in the clouds, 50 stories above the pavement, funded by a family trust that my father guarded like a religious relic. I stepped inside, the heavy mahogany door clicking shut behind me. The music stopped abruptly. "Julianne?" My mother's voice appeared from the hallway, crisp and perfectly modulated. She appeared in a silk cream blouse, not a single hair out of place. She looked at my suitcase, her eyes narrowing slightly before her face, smoothed into a practiced expression of maternal warmth. "Darling, you didn't mention you were flying back today." "The flight got bumped up," I said, my voice sounding flat in the expansive hallway. "Where's Ethan?" He isn't answering his phone, and his car wasn't in our garage. My father emerged from the study, a glass of scotch resting in his palm. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on the amber liquid. "You should have stayed in Europe, Julianne. You always rush back to things that don't require your immediate attention." "What is that supposed to mean?" I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach. The air in the penthouse felt thick, suffocating. My mother sighed, a delicate, exhausted sound she used whenever I became difficult. "Sit down, Julianne. Drink some tea. You look pale." "Where is my husband?" I repeated, louder this time. My father took a slow sip of his drink, his shoulders tense. "He's at St. Jude's. In the intensive care unit. There was an incident last night." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Ethan was healthy. He was 28, a long-distance runner, a man who meticulously tracked his heart rate. An incident? What kind of incident? "An accident," my mother said quickly, her hand reaching out to touch my arm, though her grip lacked any real warmth. "He collapsed here on the balcony, internal bleeding. The doctors are doing what they can, but it's critical. We didn't want to panic you while you were overseas. They hadn't called me. My husband was fighting for his life 50 stories below them, and they were sitting in their penthouse, listening to Mozart and sipping 20-year-old scotch. They hadn't even left a message." As I stared at the serene, undisturbed luxury of their home, a sickening realization washed over me. They weren't grieving, and they weren't panicked. They were waiting. I dropped my bag, turned on my heel, and ran for the elevator, the heavy scent of lilies clinging to my clothes. If you want to know what my parents were hiding in that penthouse while my husband lay dying, make sure to hit the subscribe button for the Whispered Wrongs channel and turn on notifications. The truth behind their calm is darker than anything I could have anticipated. The intensive care unit smelled of antiseptic and ozone, a harsh contrast to the suffocating florals of my parents' penthouse. Ethan looked tiny beneath the tangle of wires and the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of the ventilator. His face was a map of deep purple bruises, his bottom lip split cleanly down the center. The doctor, a tired man whose badge read Dr. Eris, met me outside the glass partition, his clipboard cradled against his chest like a shield. "He suffered severe blunt force trauma," Dr. Eris said. His voice dropped to a professional murmur. "The internal bleeding was caused by a ruptured spleen. Your parents told the paramedics he tripped over the threshold of the balcony doors and fell against the stone balustrade." I looked through the glass at Ethan's hands. His knuckles were raw, scraped to the pink underflesh. "Does a fall over a threshold cause defensive wounds on the hands, doctor?" "Dr. Eris hesitated, his eyes shifting down to his notes. "We report the injuries as they present. The police were notified, as is standard with severe trauma, but your father provided a statement and, well, without the patient conscious to give his own account, the file remains open but inactive." My father's shadow loomed large over this city, his financial influence a quiet weight that kept awkward questions from gaining traction. I sat by Ethan's bed for 6 hours, holding his cold, unmoving hand. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room, a fragile thread keeping me tethered to sanity. At dawn, I returned to our apartment to change my clothes. The space felt hollow. I walked into the kitchen and noticed Ethan's iPad resting on the counter, its battery dead. I plugged it in, waiting for the screen to flicker alive. When it did, a cascade of delayed notifications filled the display. Most were work emails, but there was a string of text messages from an unknown number sent the afternoon before his collapse. "She's going to find out, Ethan. Your father-in-law already knows. He has the financial statements from the boutique account. If you don't meet him tonight to sign the relinquishment papers, he'll tell Julianne everything about where that money actually went." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the glass. The boutique account was the investment fund my grandfather had set up for me. A fund my father managed, but one that Ethan had recently been given administrative access to help us buy our first home. I opened our shared laptop and logged into our bank portal. The investment account balance, which should been sitting at just over $400,000, was down to less than $12,000. The transfer logs showed 5 separate withdrawals over the last 3 months, all routed to a shell corporation registered under a name I didn't recognize: Vanguard Aesthetics. A cold dread settled in my chest. My husband hadn't just fallen, he had been cornered. And my parents weren't just protecting the family name, they were holding a leash. The text message on Ethan's iPad led me down a dark path. I spent the afternoon tracking Vanguard Aesthetics, the shell corporation that had drained my inheritance. It didn't take long to find the registered agent. The name on the public filing belonged to a private cosmetic surgery clinic uptown, the exact clinic where my younger sister, Vivian, had been receiving treatments for the past year. Vivian had always been the golden child, the fragile prodigy whose artistic ambitions were funded entirely by my parents. I, on the other hand, was the reliable one, expected to marry well and stay out of the way. I left the hospital and drove to Vivian's apartment, an expensive loft my parents paid for. I didn't knock. I used the spare key she kept under the planter. The door swung open to reveal a space littered with high-end designer shopping bags and blueprints for a new gallery space she had been boasting about on social media. Vivian was sitting at her kitchen island, sipping a green smoothie, looking entirely untroubled. When she saw me, her eyes widened slightly, her hand freezing mid-air. "Julianne? I thought you were in Amsterdam," she said, her voice dropping into that sweet, innocent register she used whenever she wanted something. "Ethan is in a coma, Vivian," I said, walking toward her, my voice deadly calm. "And my investment account is empty. Care to explain why $400,000 of my money funded your new gallery and your lifestyle?" Vivian's expression shifted instantly from surprise to defensive arrogance. She stood up, crossing her arms. "Dad told me that money was a family asset. He said you and Ethan weren't using it, and that I needed it more for my launch. He gave Ethan the clearance to transfer it." "Ethan didn't transfer it for you, Vivian." "He was blackmailed," I said, stepping closer. "Who sent the text on his phone? Who told him Dad would ruin him if he didn't sign the papers?" Vivian let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "You really are blind, aren't you? Ethan wasn't blackmailed to save me. Dad caught him. Ethan was sleeping with one of my gallery assistants, Julianne. He was using your money to buy her jewelry and pay her rent. Dad just redirected the rest of the funds to me before Ethan could spend it all on his little mistress. Dad told Ethan that if he didn't sign over his rights to your marital property and leave town, he'd expose the affair to you and ruin his career." The room seemed to lose all its oxygen. The betrayal wasn't a single strike. It was a web. My husband had cheated on me using my own inheritance. My father had used that affair not to protect me, but to strip Ethan of his legal rights to our assets and funnel the remaining wealth to his favorite daughter. "And the balcony?" I whispered, the betrayal burning the back of my throat. "What happened on the balcony?" Vivian shrugged, turning her back to me. "Ethan got angry when he realized he was losing everything. He lunged at Dad. Dad defended himself. It was an accident, Julianne. But honestly, Ethan got what he deserved. And you should thank Dad for cleaning up your mess. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. The sheer weight of the deception was too heavy for an outburst. I left Vivian's loft and drove back to the hospital in a state of absolute, icy clarity. The two people I was supposed to trust most, my husband and my family, had reduced my life to a transaction. Ethan had traded my trust for a mistress. My father had traded Ethan's violence via financial windfall for his favorite child. When I entered the ICU room, Dr. Eris was checking Ethan's vitals. The machine's rhythm was steady, a robotic heartbeat keeping a liar alive. "Any change?" I asked, my voice devoid of the panic from the previous night. His brain activity is stable, and the internal swelling is reducing, Eris said, turning to look at me with a soft, sympathetic expression. He might surface in the next 24 hours, Julianne. You should get some rest. I have rest, I lied smoothly. Doctor, I need to retrieve Ethan's personal effects from the night he was brought in. The police said my father handled the intake, but his clothes and personal items must be somewhere. They're in the secure locker downstairs, he said, scribbling a release note on a prescription pad. Take this to security. 10 minutes later, I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage, a clear plastic property bag in my lap. Inside were Ethan's ruined clothes, his wallet, and his wristwatch. But it was his jacket that held what I was looking for. In the inner pocket, crumpled and stained with a dark smear of dry blood, was a legal document, a voluntary relinquishment of marital property rights, dated the night of his fall. It was signed by Ethan, but the witness signature line was blank. Beside the document was something else, a small high-definition digital voice recorder. Ethan was an architect. He recorded site notes constantly. I pressed the play button, my breath catching in my throat. The audio was muffled at first, the sound of wind whipping against a high altitude. Then my father's voice, sharp and biting. You think you're clever, Ethan. You're a parasite. You took her money for your little girl on the side, and now you're going to sign this paper. You leave this marriage with nothing, and Julianne will never know why you walked away. I won't sign it. Ethan's voice was desperate, cracking with panic. You're using my mistake to steal her inheritance for Vivian. If I go down, I'm taking your family name with me. I'll tell the board about the offshore accounts you used to fund Vivian's gallery. A heavy scuffle followed. A sickening thud against stone, a sharp, agonized gasp from Ethan, then silence save for the wind. My father's voice returned, cold and breathing heavily. Call the paramedics, Eleanor. Tell them he tripped. My mother's voice answered, calm and immediate. And the papers? I have them. He signed before he lunged. We'll handle the rest. The following evening, my mother hosted her annual charity gala at the Penthouse. It was a flawless display of high society penance, raising money for underprivileged youth while my parents drank champagne that cost more than a family's monthly rent. I arrived late, wearing a simple black dress that felt like morning attire. The Penthouse was filled with the city's elite, investors, board members from my father's firm, and society journalists. Vivian stood near the grand piano, showing off a digital rendering of her new gallery space to a group of wealthy patrons. My father was at the center of the room, holding court with his usual effortless authority. When my mother spotted me, her face froze for a fraction of a second before she glided over, her fingers gripping my wrist with a tight warning pressure. Julianne, what are you doing here? You should be at the hospital. Ethan's condition is stable, I said. My voice carried just loud enough for the nearby guests to turn their heads. And I wanted to support the family. After all, family is everything to us, isn't it, Mother? My father joined us, his eyes narrowing as he scanned my face for any sign of a breakdown. Good to see you, Julianne. Keep your composure. We have important guests tonight. Of course, Dad, I said, offering a tight, empty smile. I actually brought a special tribute for the gallery presentation. Vivian has worked so hard, and I wanted everyone to understand exactly what funded her beautiful new venture. Before either of them could stop me, I walked toward the media station near the grand piano. The technician running the projector looked up, surprised, as I handed him a flash drive. Play the audio file on here, please. My father requested it for the introductory speech. The technician, recognizing me, nodded and plugged it in. I stepped back into the crowd, watching my father's face as the audio levels synced with the Penthouse's state-of-the-art surround sound system. The classical music stopped. A heavy, static hiss filled the room, followed by the distinct sound of wind whipping across a high balcony. You think you're clever, Ethan? You're a parasite. You leave this marriage with nothing, and Julianne will never know why you walked away. The room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. The guests stopped talking mid-sentence. My father's glass of scotch slipped from his hand, shattering against the herringbone hardwood floor. I won't sign it. If I go down, I'm taking your family name with me. I'll tell the board about the offshore accounts you used to fund Vivian's gallery. Vivian's face drained of color. She looked at the crowd, her lips parting in horror as the sounds of the physical struggle echoed through the speakers, followed by Ethan's sickening thud against the stone balustrade. My mother staggered backward, her hand flying to her mouth as her own voice rang out clear and cold. And the papers? I have them. He signed before he lunged, "We'll handle the rest." The audio cut to black. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, heavy enough to crush anyone beneath it. The board members looked at my father with expressions of disgust and immediate professional panic. The society journalists were already pulling out their phones, their thumbs flying across their screens. I walked over to my father, who stood frozen amidst the glass shards of his drink. "You wanted Ethan to leave with nothing, Dad," I said softly, ensuring my voice reached the nearest investors. "But it looks like you're the one holding an empty bag." The fallout from the gala was immediate, but I didn't stay to watch the guests scramble for the exits. I left the penthouse as the first wave of whispers turned into open accusations. My father's empire wasn't built on concrete. It was built on reputation, and I had just pulled the foundation out from under it. The next morning, the financial sector was in chaos. The board of my father's firm issued a public statement before the markets opened, announcing his immediate suspension pending an internal audit into the offshore accounts mentioned on the recording. The investors who had stood in his living room sipping champagne hours earlier were now pulling their capital out of his funds. I didn't go back to the apartment I shared with Ethan. Instead, I rented a small, nondescript room under a different name near the financial district. I needed a quiet place to execute the second phase of my plan. My parents thought the recording was the extent of my leverage, but they didn't understand that a cornered person doesn't stop fighting just because they scored the first hit. I spent 48 hours downloading every financial statement from the boutique investment account. I mapped out the exact route my $400,000 took from my account through the Shell Corporation Vanguard Aesthetics and directly into the bank accounts funding Vivian's gallery and her personal luxury expenses. I didn't need a courtroom to destroy her. I just needed to show the world that her artistic genius was bought with stolen family money. On Thursday afternoon, my mother called me from a burner phone. Her voice had lost its crisp, aristocratic perfection. She sounded frantic, her breathing shallow. "Julianne, you have to stop this," she hissed, her voice cracking. "The firm froze your father's personal assets this morning. They're looking into everything. We can't pay the maintenance fees on the penthouse. Vivian's gallery opening has been canceled, and her sponsors are pulling out. You're destroying your own blood. You stopped being my blood the night you stood on that balcony and let a man bleed out while you checked his signature on a contract," I said, my voice dead and empty. "He cheated on you," she screamed, dropping all pretense of elegance. "He was a thief and a liar. We did it to protect you." "You did it to enrich Vivian," I replied smoothly. "If you wanted to protect me, you would have told me the truth. You used my betrayal to fund your favorite child's vanity project." "Goodbye, Mother." I hung up and blocked the number. Then, I packaged the complete financial trail, the bank statements, the Shell company registrations, and the invoices for Vivian's gallery, and sent them directly to every major art publication and news outlet in the city. By evening, Vivian's name was trending online, not as a rising star in the art world, but as a fraud who built her career on her sister's stolen inheritance. The fallout from the gala was immediate, but I didn't stay to watch the guests scramble for the exits. I left the penthouse as the first wave of whispers turned into open accusations. My father's empire wasn't built on concrete. It was built on reputation, and I had just pulled the foundation out from under it. The next morning, the financial sector was in chaos. The board of my father's firm issued a public statement before the markets opened, announcing his immediate suspension pending an internal audit into the offshore accounts mentioned on the recording. The investors who had stood in his living room sipping champagne hours earlier were now pulling their capital out of his funds. I didn't go back to the apartment I shared with Ethan. Instead, I rented a small, nondescript room under a different name near the financial district. I needed a quiet place to execute the second phase of my plan. My parents thought the recording was the extent of my leverage, but they didn't understand that a cornered person doesn't stop fighting just because they scored the first hit. I spent 48 hours downloading every financial statement from the boutique investment account. I mapped out the exact route my $400,000 took from my account, through the Shell Corporation Vanguard Aesthetics, and directly into the bank accounts funding Vivian's gallery and her personal luxury expenses. I didn't need a courtroom to destroy her. I just needed to show the world that her artistic genius was bought with stolen family money. On Thursday afternoon, my mother called me from a burner phone. Her voice had lost its crisp, aristocratic perfection. She sounded frantic, her breathing shallow. Julianne, you have to stop this, she hissed, her voice cracking. The firm froze your father's personal assets this morning. They're looking into everything. We can't pay the maintenance fees on the penthouse. Vivian's gallery opening has been canceled, and her sponsors are pulling out. You're destroying your own blood. You stopped being my blood the night you stood on that balcony and let a man bleed out while you checked his signature on a contract, I said, my voice dead and empty. He cheated on you, she screamed, dropping all pretense of elegance. He was a thief and a liar. We did it to protect you. You did it to enrich Vivian, I replied smoothly. If you wanted to protect me, you would have told me the truth. You used my betrayal to fund your favorite child's vanity project. Goodbye, Mother. I hung up and blocked the number. Then, I packaged the complete financial trail, the bank statements, the shell company registrations, and the invoices for Vivian's gallery, and sent them directly to every major art publication and news outlet in the city. By evening, Vivian's name was trending online, not as a rising star in the art world, but as a fraud who built her career on her sister's stolen inheritance. By Friday morning, the penthouse that once sat 50 stories above the world felt less like a palace and more like a tomb. I didn't need to step inside to know the atmosphere. The news headlines did the work for me. The internal audit at my father's firm had triggered an immediate freeze on all joint family accounts to protect the company from liability. I walked into the lobby of their building at noon. The heavy scent of lilies in the foyer was gone, replaced by the sterile smell of wax and dust. The doorman, who usually greeted me with a deferential bow, kept his head down, staring intently at his desk. The family name was toxic now. I took the elevator up alone. When the doors opened directly into the penthouse, the silence was absolute. The classical music was gone. The grand piano stood covered in a white sheet, looking like a monument to a dead era. My father sat at the long mahogany dining table, surrounded by stacks of unread mail and printed financial balance sheets. He looked smaller, his expensive tailored suit hanging loosely off his shoulders. He didn't look up when I approached. "They're taking the apartment, Julianne," he said, his voice flat and dry, stripped of its commanding resonance. "The board revoked my housing allowance. We have 30 days to liquidate everything inside and vacate." "I know," I said, standing at the opposite end of the table. "I came to collect my grandfather's journals. The ones you kept in your study." He let out a weak, raspy laugh. "Is that all we are to you now? A salvage yard?" "You were a salvage yard the moment you priced my marriage and my inheritance," I replied calmly. Vivian emerged from the back hallway, her eyes red and swollen, her face completely devoid of makeup. She looked terrified, stripped of the designer armor she usually wore like a shield. "Julianne, please. The art community blacklisted me. No gallery will touch my work. I have debts I can't pay. Can't you tell them the audio was altered? Can't you say it was a misunderstanding?" I looked at my younger sister, the golden child, who had spent her entire life being shielded from the consequences of her choices. "The bank logs don't lie, Vivian. You spent my money. You knew where it came from, and you enjoyed every second of it. You'll have to find a way to live like everyone else now." My mother walked out from the kitchen, holding a packed cardboard box. She didn't look at me with anger. She looked at me with a profound, chilling emptiness. "You've ruined us, Julianne. I hope your conscience is clean." "My conscience is perfectly clear," I said, picking up the box of my grandfather's journals from the study shelf. "I didn't write the script, Mother. I just let everyone hear the recording." As I turned to leave, my father finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "And what about your husband? The man who started all of this?" "Ethan woke up this morning," I said, pausing at the elevator doors. "And he's about to find out that while he was asleep, the world he tried to steal from me vanished entirely." The hospital room was completely silent when I returned on Saturday morning. The ventilator had been wheeled away, replaced by the quiet, natural sound of Ethan's shallow breathing. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the acoustic tiles of the ceiling. When the door clicked shut behind me, his head turned slowly, his gaze locking onto mine with an expression of immediate, guarded panic. "Julianne," he rasped, his voice raw from the days of intubation. He tried to sit up, but the pain in his abdomen forced him back down against the pillows. "Your dad, he has a document. He forced me to." "I know, Ethan," I said, pulling a plastic chair up to the side of his bed. I sat down, crossing my legs, looking at him with the same detached observation I had given my parents the day before. "I have the document. I also found your voice recorder." The color drained from what was left of his bruised face. His fingers twitched against the white hospital sheet. Julianne, I can explain. The girl, it wasn't what it looked like. I was stupid. I got caught up in. You spent $400,000 of my inheritance, I interrupted, my voice dropping to a calm, steady whisper that cut through his frantic excuses. You used my grandfather's money to fund a mistress, and then you let my father use your secrets to strip us of our home. You didn't care about me, Ethan. You only cared about what you could take before the floor dropped out. I'm sorry, he whispered, a tear slipping down his cheek, cutting a clean path through the hospital grime. Please, we can fix this. We can start over. There is nothing to fix, I said, leaning in closer so he could see the absolute lack of warmth in my eyes. While you were asleep, I played that recording for my father's entire firm. His career is over. They are losing the penthouse. Vivian's gallery is gone, and her name is ruined. And as for you, I've already filed for divorce. The bank statements showing you funneling my inheritance into a shell company mean you won't see a single dime of marital assets. You left that penthouse with nothing, just like my father wanted, but you're leaving this marriage with even less. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing slightly, realizing that the quiet, compliant wife he thought he could manipulate had dismantled his entire existence while he lay unconscious. Julianne, please, I have nowhere to go. That's not my concern anymore, I said, standing up and smoothing down my jacket. I walked out of the ICU, leaving the mechanical beeps and the smell of antiseptic behind. As I stepped into the bright, blinding afternoon sun outside the hospital doors, I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel a sudden rush of happiness. The revenge was complete, and the people who had exploited me were broken, but the emptiness in my chest remained. My family was gone, my marriage was a lie, and the inheritance was spent. I had won, but the victory tasted like ash. I was finally free, but the cost of that freedom was a heart that would never fully trust the world again. If this story of calculated betrayal and cold revenge resonated with you, please leave a comment below with your thoughts on how I handled my family. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and share it with someone who loves a deep, realistic psychological thriller. Turn on your notifications so you never miss another episode of Whispered Wrongs. Thank you for listening.